Hello, and welcome to Integrated Wellbeing YouTube channel and podcast for people in grief and the professionals who serve them. We provide education, inspiration, and practical tools by interviewing those bereaved by loss, mental health professionals, and grief specialists. Integrated Wellbeing Institute seeks to awaken the griever to their inner peace through the guidance of their body. And today I'm very grateful to be able to introduce to you Joan S. Hoff. And Joan is a person who has a master's degree in educational psychology, and we work together on the Suicide Bereavement Support Northwest Board. Joan is the president and I serve as the secretary, and we've gotten to know each other over the years. So welcome, Joan. It's so good to have you here today.
Thank you. I'm pleased to be here.
Good. And what we're going to do today is we're going to delve deep into Joan's expertise of facilitating bereavement groups and why that's important. And we've not touched on that at all in this program series. So, like so many of the people who are here as professional experts, Joan has walked that path of grief herself. And so, Joan, if you'll tell us where you were working for 20 years and what happened early in that work setting.
So I have been involved in the field of grief and supporting people who are grieving for the past 30 years or so. I had the opportunity to work at the Dougy Center, which is a National Center for Grieving Children and Families, for 28 years. And that's where I retired from. And it gave me the opportunity to learn about people's grief from the people who are grieving. And I think my best teachers in all the world were the children. And I worked with kids starting from the age of 3, believe it or not, 3, all the way up through teenagers and their parents. And what the children taught me was that you just need to listen to what they have to say, that the listening is the gift for them, and that we don't need to know how to fix them or how to make it better for them or how to, but what we can do is we can provide them with the person who is there to be present and to listen and to witness their grief. And I think that's the gift that I learned way back, not through school, but through the people that I worked with. And that served me through all of the work that I do, from working with children all the way to working with adults who just need to not be alone in their grief, to have someone who's present with them, to have someone who will witness their story. And so that's the lesson that I learned from the kids that I take with me as I go through my grief work that I've done throughout the years.
Thank you. And did I hear you say the children you worked with were 3 all the way up to what age?
All the way through teenagers, and then their adult parents as well. So I've worked with pretty much everyone. And the reason we work with kids younger than 3, not that they're not grieving, it's just that they're not verbal. Whereas kids under 3 are usually individual processors, not group processors.
And so I just mentioned to our audience that Joan had gotten a message this morning that her internet is unstable. She lives in the rural part of Portland. And I find that metaphor so apt for this discussion. Grief is so unstabling. And so here we are from time to time. Joan will keep speaking, but she'll freeze on our screen and then she'll continue. And so if I don't understand, I'll ask her and we'll proceed from there. So I'm very curious, Joan, at the Dougy Center, How big were the groups of children with whom you worked, especially the little ones? Because as a speech pathologist, I worked with the little ones too, but I was lucky because most of the time it was one-on-one.
We worked with the little ones, usually had about 8 children in the group, 8 or 9 kids in the group.
So 8 or 9 in the children's groups, and then what?
15 or 16 in the kids groups.
Oh, really?
Yes, but we had a huge number of volunteers. We had a ratio of 1 volunteer for every 2 or 3 kids. So we
Wow.
had a lot of adults that supported those children as well.
Okay. All right. And then how long were the groups, time-wise, the duration?
Were for 90 minutes. The little kid groups were for an hour because they could just make an hour, but the other kids were for 90 minutes. And the adult groups that I do now are also 90 minutes. And I find that that is a good amount of time. The shorter than that for people, it don't get everything in that they want. And more than 90 minutes tends to become overwhelming for people, and they start rambling. So I find 90 minutes is kind of that magic amount of time to have a group.
That's just amazing. So let's go into that place of grief that was so personal to you. 3 years into working at the Dougy Center, your husband Larry died of suicide.
Yes, that's exactly what happened. It was one of the suicide deaths that was totally out of the blue for me. He was not mentally health challenged in the way that a lot of people experience over a long term. He had a lot of issues that came up, and I always refer to it as the perfect storm, where all of these factors, sleep deprivation, physical, other challenges that he experienced, all came together in one moment. And I think that that is, for me, the story that I'm able to make sense of, which I think is really important in a suicide death, is to find a story that makes sense for you, and that all of those factors came together in one moment, and it was so overwhelming for him in that moment. He was not able to survive. He ended up dead.
Yeah, and that tragedy has been several decades now. For
30 years, 29 years this month.
And so how did you, Joan, because so many people say to me, how do I do this grief? How long were you away from work? How did work support you because you were with people grieving? How did you navigate those early years of grief?
So it's been a long time ago. But what I know, so everyone really grieves differently, and the way that I dealt with my grief, is very different and very much challenging for other people. I went back to work very quickly after my husband Larry died, because for me, I was alone then. My boys had gone off, they're living on their own. So I was by myself. And that made it awfully challenging in terms of, how do you spend your time? And I just couldn't imagine spending my time being alone, being lonely, not having any interactions with people. And so my work, because I was working with at the Dougy Center at the time, they understood about grief and grieving people. And they said, come whenever you want for as long as you want. Do whatever you find is helpful to you. So I was able to go to work, and if that particular moment or that particular day I wasn't present enough to be able to do group, someone would step in for me. Someone would step in when I was not able to be present for the group.
Yes.
But when I was there. The children were amazing. I got sympathy cards from the kids, which was absolutely phenomenal, because they understood and they knew what it was like. And so that was really important for me. And I have a sense, I've always had this ability to compartmentalize things in my brain.
Yes.
So I can say, I'm at work now. And
Mm-hmm.
while I'm at work, I'm doing these things, and I'm not going to be dealing with my grief. Now, obviously, you can't 100% stop that, but a
Sure.
majority of the time, I was able to say, okay, I've got group now, and the group was exciting for me, and I knew that I was making a difference for these children, and so I was able to put aside my own personal grief during that period, and do my group, and then I would go home. I found that evenings were the most challenging, obviously. For
Yes.
many
Mm-hmm.
people, that is true. It's like
Yes.
you're really alone at that point. Everyone,
Mm-hmm.
nobody's calling you, nobody's coming over, everybody, you're getting ready for bed, and all of those things kind of whirl through your brain.
Mm-hmm.
That was the opportunity where I want to be journaler. I've always wanted to be able to journal, but I was never good at it. I have about 54-page journals. But during that period of time, one of the things that was very helpful for me was that I sat down and I wrote down exactly what my day was, what I would have said to Larry had when I had come home from work. Say, okay, so today, Larry, this is what happened.
Mm-hmm.
I did that for about 6 weeks, and I think that was that transition for me, that ability for me to transition from him being there and me telling him to understanding, in your heart, I mean, of course I cognitively understood it, but that
Yes.
emotional understand,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That awareness that
and I needed to
of,
develop a new
yeah.
life.
Oh, that's beautiful. And it's very interesting. The reason I love to interview people, Joan, is because of the uniqueness of each person's grief journey. And no one has ever shared the uh, tool that you just gave us of the journaling of this was my day, Larry. And I'm curious, did you read it out loud then after you got it written, or was writing it sufficient?
Writing was sufficient for me, and for the first year or so afterwards, I would pull that out and look at it and read it a little bit, and to say, wow, this is what I was going through during that period. And that also gave me a really nice marker to say, when Larry first died, this is what I was experiencing, this is what it was like, and now I'm in a different place. And so it was helpful to me to see the growth and the changes that I had made over that year, or over the next couple of years,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
which sometimes is hard to recognize if you.
It is, yeah, because you're not totally back to a life of radiance or a life of joy, or know who you are. And so it's like, oh, but look how far I came.
Yes.
Look
Look,
how far I've come. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
where I was
So,
before, where I am now.
yes. So let's go back to the benefits of group work. And there are a couple types of groups. There's the group where people can drop in, and then there's the group where it's a closed group. And you have words for that. So let's talk to our audience about that, please, Joan.
Perfect. So there's I look at it as like there's kind of 3 different kinds of groups. So the
Okay.
group that we do, the suicide bereavement support group, is a literal drop-in group. So we have the date and time scheduled, and anybody can come anytime. And that's really valuable for people in a community where they don't have a lot of specific types of deaths. So, you don't have a whole group of people who've had a spouse die or a child die or whatever. Any kind of death by suicide, those people can come. And they can come maybe 4 or 5 times, and then they don't come for a couple or 3 times, and then they come back when something big comes up for them. So that group meets a need that's really, I think, an important need in a community where you're able to say, we're here, there are people here that understand that you can come here anytime, we're always going to be here, and we're always going to be present for you whenever you need us. Mm-hmm. So it provides a really beautiful opportunity for folks. And I love the fact that it's drop-in and people can come whenever they need.
Yes.
There is a group like the Dougy Center, which is an open group similar to that, but you had to be enrolled. And there's a number of people that could come. So it's open in that when somebody drops out, a new person can come in. But the group is closed in that that for that period of time. So if you've got 15 kids in the group, not anybody can just come whenever. Those 15 people are part of that group until they're ready to leave. When one person leaves, a new person is added. So it's an open group in that regard, but it's closed in that it's not, people can't just drop in whenever.
Okay, so what I'm hearing you say then is that it's the duration of the time that the people or the children and their parents are in the group is up to them. And then when they feel like they're complete, then they leave and then a new person can come.
Exactly. And
okay.
And so that's kind of a combo of the open and closed piece.
It is.
For a lot of groups, for people, they can't, it's hard for them to manage, to think that, oh my gosh, there might be 20 people tonight and there might be 10 people the next time, that numbers is important for them. So for those people, maybe that kind of a model would work better. And so people actually enroll in the group. And then there's a waiting list. And when somebody leaves, another person can come in and you call them up and say, you're in now. And then the third type of group that I'm doing now is a closed-ended group, and it's time limited. And so I'm working with this organization called Coping After Suicide, and Georgena as well. And we do groups for 10 weeks.
Of that 10 weeks, then people are complete, right?
Exactly. They can be done. So for those groups, the beauty of that is there are the same people that come and they start together and they work through their process together and then they end together. And so that's a lovely model as well. Challenges with that model is that if 2 weeks into the group somebody has a death, it's going to be another 10 or 15 weeks before they can join a group. So that's a little bit of a challenge. So there's a waiting time. They can't get it as quickly as with the other two types of groups possibly.
That's really interesting that you point that out. And what I appreciate about the Coping After Suicide loss groups is the fact that the groups are specific to the loss. So there's the mother's group, the spouse group, so many groups.
And the thing that I have found particular, and I'm sure that with the mother's group that you're doing, that you will find as well, is spouse died by suicide that are all in the same community at the same time. So those people might go to a group, and there's lots of people who had a child death or a friend death or parent death even, and they're the only ones who've had a spouse death. And for people who've had a spouse death, just like for people who had a child death or a parent death, there are some specific issues that that they come across, that they address, that other people don't deal with, right? It's so being able to have all those people together that have all had the similar experience, similar concerns or fears or challenges. To be able to hear that they're not, again, truly not alone. There are other people like other people going through what they're going through.
And it's such a comfort to people to know that this is what this mother is experiencing, or this is what this person has experienced after the loss of their spouse. Right. And so I've found that in the groups that you and I have facilitated together for suicide bereavement support, those open groups where people can come as they need it and feel called to come, there's so many different types of losses in there. And so it ultimately the bottom line is I'm not alone in my grief. Right. Everyone is grieving differently. And this is a call for growth, even though I didn't ask for it. Those are the basics. And then these groups, though, it's very specific.
And in the other groups, the other thing, that commonality is the suicide death. And the suicide piece is huge. And sometimes that's all that matters, is the fact that it was a death by suicide. Doesn't matter the relationship. It matters. This was a suicide death. How do you maneuver, how do you talk to your friends? How do you tell people? How do you maneuver your own guilt or your own shame, possibly your responsibility that you have, which is oftentimes very different than people who experienced other kinds of deaths.
Yes, yes. So if you were to say to someone who asks the question, what's the benefit of grieving in a group setting? What would you say to them? We've touched on so many of those things already, but what would be the 2 or 3 things that you would say to them, Joan?
I say that that grief is a lonely process, and that oftentimes when you're with other people who have had that similar experience, it helps you to feel less alone. So that, I think, is one of the major things. And I think that the piece that we've talked about before is that having someone witness your story, having someone witness your grief, that you are present to hear somebody else's story is really helpful, and that people who have similar losses can help each other.
Yes.
So it's like if you go to see a therapist, not, and I think therapy is absolutely fabulous, and most of my people go to therapy and to the support group. You're focusing on your loss, your death, your experience. But if you are in a group, there's a whole bunch of people and say, "Oh, I experienced that too. This is what I tried. I wouldn't suggest this. It didn't work very well for me," or "You might want to try this because I found that this was kind of helpful for me." So being able to then have a multiple ideas and multiple suggestions from other people can help you to say, "Oh, I hadn't thought about that before," or "I'm so glad that you said that because I felt that, and I felt the shame that I couldn't really say it to anyone else in the world." And the fact that you said it says, I can say that too. I can say, I feel betrayed by my husband, or I feel, that sometimes I'm relieved, things that people don't say necessarily, that there's some stigma or societal stigma around stuff like that. For them to be able to say that, and for somebody else to say, "Oh my gosh, thank you for sharing that. That's something that I'm too." So that can only happen in a group. Now, groups are not beneficial for everybody. I was not a group person. I didn't go to groups myself. I don't feel it's helpful for me personally, but I know the benefit, and I know how to support other people in groups. So I would have people not beat themselves up if they feel not comfortable in a group, not the right group, or maybe groups are not the best way for them to process their grief. But for those for whom it works, it's valuable and it's really powerful.
Yes, I really appreciate what you said just now about it. They're not for everyone, and it may not be the right group. I remember going in our town, there was only one grief group option at that time. And the stories that people told, because they were 30 years from the time of death and they were still telling these stories, it was like, that's not the way I see or intend to move through my grief. So I didn't go the 3 times that you and I invite people and recommend people to come back to our suicide bereavement support group. I just went once, and that was enough for me. So it's very interesting that that's the case.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I know that you're very involved in training other people to facilitate groups. Joan, do you want to speak about that at all?
Sure. So with the organization American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, I'm involved with a couple of their national initiatives and our local state initiatives. But in the national level, there is a training program for people who are interested in learning how to facilitate groups for people who've had a suicide death, both for adults and for kids and teens. And so I'm on a training team that goes across the United States, and we offer that training to people with the idea of giving them all of the support that they need to be able to do those groups in their communities, to start groups in their communities. And they would be most likely like the first group that we talked about, which is the open-ended groups. Anybody can come
Yes.
I'm also on the National Loss and Healing Council, and we help to make kind of the policy for AFSP for the survivors across the United States. And one of the groups that we'll be doing, a conference we're going to be doing this coming year, is long-term survivors. So people who have recently had a survivor or had a suicide death often can find groups to go to. But if it's been 3 or 4 years since the death or more, people say, well, why are you still dealing with that? Aren't you over it? Aren't you done with it? And what we know about grief and suicide death is that it's a lifelong journey, and that journey continues over a lifetime. And so for people who are a little bit farther out, there's really not a lot of support systems for them, because everybody says, get over it. Up again, you're still stuck on that,
Yes.
And that people, that sense of there must be something wrong with, and I'm still grieving, and it's been 20 years for me, and things still come up, around my husband's death. So finding opportunities for those people to be able to get the support they need is welcomed as well. So we're going to be doing a conference for them in July.
That's amazing. Where's the conference, Joan?
It's going to be in Austin, Texas. This
oh, good.
July.
Kind of hot.
Very hot. And then in addition to that, the coping after suicide groups that we're doing, I'm also doing a continuing journey group. So for people who've been 3 or more years out after their death, I'm doing a group for them, because their issues are, again, different than people that are newly bereaved. And they found that they don't fit well in those newly bereaved groups. They still have issues they want to talk about and deal with. We provide that opportunity for them as well.
That's really neat. I'm curious if like 1 or 2 of those issues for people who are in a continuing journey group might be that you can share with our audience. What do those people bring? We see the grief and the overwhelm of the emotions for those people in raw and fragile grief, and it's different then.
Right. And they feel like, a lot of times they haven't come up with that story that I talked about at the very beginning.
Yes, the reason, the why.
What makes sense to you? What's that story? And so, they feel there's still that guilt of, if I had only done this, or if I had only done that, then maybe that person would still be alive. And so we talk about the difference between regret and guilt. And regret is, I wished I would have done, and so that's how we restated. I wished I would have, more aware. I wished I would have not gone to the grocery store that day, but it's not my fault that he died, is because I went to the grocery store that day, which is the guilt. So help people to understand that. And helping people, the other piece that I find is so very important is really focusing on how the person lived and not how the person died. They're stuck in that grief of, this is how the person died, as opposed to share memories. Tell me about how they lived. Tell me about that person, how much you loved them, why you loved them, what was exciting about them. That's what I want to hear. And I think that when people can let go of carrying the guilt and that, the way they died, and that stigma, and they can let go of that and make sense of it and move on to being able to say, this person was so important in my life and I love them dearly. And this is what I learned from them. This is what I taught them. This is how we spent our time together. Then it changes their grief. And that's the piece around that continuing journey, that when people are ready to be able to give up some of the things that they're carrying that don't serve them well anymore, then they can move on to this part of their life where it can serve them better.
Yes. And that's what I loved about working with you in the online group that we did together, Joan, because you would say to the people in the group, let us learn about, and then you would say the name of the person who had passed, and then that person would have the permission to share. And I loved learning about the fact that Larry was an angler. I did not know that he was a fisherman. And gosh, I've known you for several years, and that was the first I heard about it. And it was so exciting for me. It gave me more of a picture and appreciation of him and his aliveness.
Right. And that's the piece that you want to know about, and that's the piece you want to remember, not how he died.
Mm-hmm.
The other piece that I do a lot of work with those continuing journey people is in understanding how the brain of people who die by suicide have been impacted. And I talk about the studies that they've done where they did autopsies of people whose brains who've died by suicide, and then autopsies of brains of people who died from other things. And what they have found is that the prefrontal cortex, the synapses are not firing in the same way into the brains of the people who die by suicide. The prefrontal cortex, the synapses are not firing to that part of the brain, to the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that deals with problem solving and impulse control and executive functionings. And so if you think about the fact that this person is, like maybe in incredible physical and emotional pain, and if their brain is not allowing them to think about what they could do when they're in that pain, the only thing that they can think about is, I need to stop the pain. I need to stop the pain. And the way that they know to stop the pain, because they can't problem solve, because their problem solving skills are not at their best in that moment, and the impulse control is short. They say, I can't do it. I have to die. I can't do this anymore. And the only way that I know to end this pain is to end this life. And I think that when people understand that it literally is a brain malfunction instead of a character flaw.
What came to me, Joan, as you were talking, was the brain went offline. They didn't have the capacity to connect.
Exactly.
And use this wonderful brain. It left.
Yeah. It stopped working. It stopped working for a period of time. And so we don't know why that happens, and we don't know how it gets fixed, or if it does get fixed. But that, I think, is a really important piece for me, to help people to understand it was their brain that was not working. And so if their heart was not working, you wouldn't be carrying this guilt and talking about how the heart issues were all the thing, right? You'd be talking about how they lived and how important it was. And so I just say, relate it the same way. Their brain, which is an organ of the body, wasn't working right. It malfunctioned. And why would you have any negativity about that? Why? Because of the mental health challenges, that people have trouble talking about.
When we get to the point where we can talk about brain disease, when, the brain attack, like the heart attack.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Then we can hopefully take some of that stigma away from suicide death, to say, it was so unfortunate that my husband was at that point where he felt that the only way that he could be was to be dead, right? That not be any longer in this pain, whatever that was that was going on with him, and how can you how can you find that problematic, or how can you blame him, or how can you give take on guilt about that, because his brain stopped working.
And I really appreciate you bringing this up, because that's with our son Reed. Reed said, as he left the high school that night, after being banned from the 9th grade basketball for the rest of the year, the team, and being suspended from school for 3 days, so he'd never failed publicly, but he hit his hand on the locker and he said to his buddies, "I'll see you next year on the basketball floor." But between running home in the cold, that short distance, something flipped. The switch flipped. And I love what you said today, because for the first time, the phrase to me came, his brain went offline. I've been saying the switch flipped, but that wasn't enough.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for sharing this with our audience and with me. It's made, like you always do, make a tremendous difference, Joan. Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a thing that worked for me. So, I feel like if I can help somebody else find something that would make sense for them, then
Yes.
hopefully that will make their journey a little easier.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I appreciate too about when we facilitate groups, you and I together, is we bring research in, and now there's wonderful books out there about the brain and grief. The Grieving Brain is one of those books.
Yes.
And it's an explanation for people who've had a tremendous loss. What's happening to my brain? Why does it feel foggy? Why do I feel like I'm not myself?
Yeah. Well, and
Mhm.
that the research that's being done around functional MRIs, where they literally are looking at the brains of people who are alive, who are grieving people,
Yes.
and do those functional MRIs, and they're finding that the brain is swollen in grieving people, and that accounts for some of that brain fog and that, think I can't remember anything, I can't think of anything.
Mm-hmm.
And that's associated oftentimes with trauma, that kind of swelling that happens with these functional MRIs, with people who've had some kind of a traumatic experience, whether it's a traumatic brain injury or some kind of other emotional trauma where it causes the brain to swell. So we have an actual physical reason why
Mm-hmm.
not being able to focus and think as clearly as grieving people as we were
Yes.
before the grief happened, because the brain
Mm-hmm.
literally is swollen.
When that swelling goes down, then a person feels better
Right.
and functions better too.
It can function. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it was interesting yesterday because I was with someone and we were talking about grief, and this person said, "And what about the post-traumatic growth
Mm.
that happens as a result of grief?" And personally, I can say I am so much more aware of so many aspects of my life, but most of all, I'm so much more compassionate and kind to myself.
Yes. And
Mm-hmm.
that's huge.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the post-traumatic growth concept is really incredibly valuable. Have to be careful, because some people say, how in the world can you feel like you can grow from this horrible experience? And they're not ready
Exactly.
for that. Please,
Right.
I don't want, I'm really careful about how I present that. But for
Mm-hmm.
me, what it's taught me is to be present in the moment, and to not worry about what's happened in the past, to live without regret. And so
Mm.
for me, it's like, if I think that I'm offered to do something, to go to Boise, Idaho in the middle of the summer when it's 95 degrees, to have a family reunion, or to stay home in beautiful Portland where it's green and fresh, would I regret not doing that?
Mm-hmm.
Not going and seeing those people, because if something
Yes.
happened to me or to them, that would have been the last time that I would see them. It puts it in life in perspective in that
It
way.
does.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
so what is it that, I haven't talked to somebody for a really long time, haven't called them, and it's like, if something should happen to them, because this has happened where, haven't talked to people, and then I find out that they've died, and
Yes.
and damn it,
Mm-hmm.
I wished I would have, and I don't want to wish I
Yes.
would have anymore. I say,
Mm-hmm.
if I wished I would have, I'm doing it now. There's no guarantee about the future. There's only
That's right.
what's here in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
So being able to say, what is it that is important for me to be doing in this moment?
Yes.
What do I need to
And
do?
it, right. And make choices based on that.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. And my goodness, that's a wonderful way forward for people who are in grief.
Yes.
Is I have said that I got to the place where I asked the question of myself, what's the most kind and loving thing I can do for myself right now?
Yes.
And I had to come back to myself because I had been such a person that was out there for others. But in order to move through the grief, I had to listen to myself.
Yes. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that there's a whole lot about people nowadays talking about mindfulness and self-care. And
Yes.
we talk really good about it. And that's one of the things that I do in my group almost every time is to say, what have you done for your, because I feel like if you have said it in your mind, if you said it out loud to a group, then it makes you a little bit more responsible for making sure that that does happen.
Exactly. Absolutely. And I'm so very happy that for facilitators, you're teaching them to be present. So if you would share a couple of techniques or pieces of information, because we all have a richer life when we're more present to ourselves and others.
I think that the biggest skill that you can have is awareness. And I think that everybody could and should practice the awareness of themselves, what's going on for me as you're speaking,
Yes.
awareness of others. So when I say that, how are the other people responding or reacting? And awareness of the environment. What's going on in our environment? Is it, everybody's it feels like it's really heavy, or it feels really
Yes.
light, or it feels really quiet, it feels really energetic. So once you have that awareness, then you practice it. So you say, okay, I'm aware that people are getting bored with this person that's continuing to talk, or I'm aware that when I said that, somebody across the room had a tear, or I'm aware that somebody told that story, I got a knot in my stomach, right?
Yes.
Or a lump in my throat, right? So if you're being aware of all of the things that are happening around you and within you, then
Yes.
you're present, right?
Yes.
That's when you can say, okay, I noticed that when you said that, I got a little lump in my throat.
Yes. Great. Yeah. Gentle grief came up.
Something came up there. Wow.
Yes.
So the awareness of that helps you to be present for the people around you. And so I think that the other thing that I really spend a lot of time talking with facilitators and other people about is, don't give people advice, speak from your experience.
Yes.
So don't give people advice, speak from your experience. So you can say, not to say, you should do that.
Right.
Rather to say, when I had a similar experience, this is what I did, and this is what I found that was helpful or not helpful for me. And that way a person isn't feeling like they're being told what to do, but they're hearing other people's stories, and then they take from there to say, oh, so if you could always speak from your own experience, as opposed to giving advice or telling people what they should or could or might want to do,
right,
is a really valuable gift in a group as well.
And that's the second time you've spoken about that and given our audience the words. So I really appreciate that so much, Joan, because when I was in a similar experience, this is what I had happen. This is what I tried. This is what worked and didn't work. Did I get it? Are those
yes, perfect?
Okay.
Yes, exactly.
And that's Go ahead.
And then what that does is for me to be able to say about something that you did was really helpful for me, and I tried that and it really worked for me too.
Yes.
As opposed to saying, you should do, because none of us like to hear somebody telling us,
No.
And you're not going to accept it in the same way as to say, I'm hearing different alternatives or ideas, and I also say to people, if you want some advice or some help, ask for it, but I would respect the people responding, not by giving the advice, but by speaking from their person, from my own experience.
From their experience.
Exactly.
Oh, Joan, this has been so rich. I'm looking at the clock and I can't believe how fast the time has gone. Even with our unstable internet interruptions, it just seems like it's flown by. So as our time together comes to a close, and what we're going to do is, when we post this video on Tuesday, the 9th of January for everyone initially, and then it'll be up forever, is we'll put your email under it. We'll put the Coping After Suicides website and the sbsnw.org's website there for people to use as resources. So is there anything else, and AFSP as well? And so is there anything else that you'd like to say before we close our time together today?
I would say that one of the things that is available on the SBS website is there is a group resource list. So if you live in Nebraska, for example, you can go to the website and find out if there's any groups in your area that provide peer support groups for suicide death. So that's a lovely resource to have as well. And I would just say that the area of suicide death is so challenging for people that we need to, as you said, be kind to ourselves and be kind to others, and I think that the piece that I work really hard on is not being judgmental, or their child or their friend died by suicide, to rather than have a judgment about that, to have a curiosity about it. Can you tell
me?
Can you tell me more about that? Can you give me some stories? I'd love to hear about that person. Again, asking about how they lived and not about the how they died piece.
Yes.
So when you're with somebody who's had a suicide death, a lot of people say, well, if there's anything that I can do, and that's not helpful oftentimes, because it's like, there's a million or there's nothing, right? But just I'm good at a couple of things that might be helpful to you. It's like, I'm a great little baker and cooker, and if you need a meal, let me know. Or could I bring something by on Tuesday? Even not even.
There you go.
Can
That's
I bring
even better.
Today, or is Wednesday better? Where you're actually suggesting that you can do, or can I pick you up this weekend and we can go to a movie?
It's a choice for the person who's grieving to make, to say yes or no to, rather than to have their offline brain come up with something that's helpful. Right. That's too taxing many times. And when I say offline, it's the grief brain is what I'm talking about.
The other thing that I find is a very helpful thing is to have little index cards that have I remember. And this is a way that people can actually, sometimes, especially when you're newly bereaved, it's hard to come up with anything that you're feeling good about that person. And I just say, just have these little cards, index cards, and say, I remember the time we went fishing. You don't have to put more than that, or I remember Larry loved leg of lamb. And have this jar full of these little I remember statements. And then as your brain comes back more online, you can use those little cards to be able to enhance those memories. A lot of times, you're driving in the car, you go, oh my gosh, I remember the time we went to that movie at that theater.
Yes. And what you just said, I'm glad the internet paused right here, because what that prompted me is that when someone is newly bereaved, those I remember cards can be at the funeral, they can be at the house. Yes. People who know that person can then write them. And that can be what you write in your sympathy card when you don't know what to say, Joan.
Exactly.
And Thank you.
And I love that you can, when you can't think of any memories, and I have people that I work with who say, there's nothing that I can remember. And I always find that curious, but that's curious. But I say, have your friends and your family write I remember statements, and that will begin your I remember. You can have a deck of cards, and when you need to have a little warmth, a remembrance of that person, you can pull out those cards and you can read them, and that's a gift for you as well.
It is. Well, Joan, you are a gift to us. Thank you so much for the gift of your presence, all of your wonderful experience, and the research-based knowledge that you've shared with us today. It has been such a treat to be with you. Thank you so much.
And as always, I so appreciate your offering this for people and doing such a wonderful job of educating the community. So thank you for all you do as well.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Take deep care.
All righty, thanks.